The stars had always seemed beautiful to Park Do-hyun. As a child growing up in Bisan, he would sit on the rooftop of his grandmother's house and watch them twinkle in the night sky. He dreamed of traveling among them someday. Now, standing before the United Earth Council, he realized the dream had turned into something far more dangerous. The Kalori Dominion had arrived 3 years ago. Their ships blocked out the sun over every major city on Earth. They did not come to destroy humanity. That would have been too easy. Instead, they came to collect. 17 star systems already belonged to them. Earth would be the 18th. The Council had tried everything. They sent diplomats who never returned. They launched nuclear weapons that the Kalori ships swatted away like flies. They begged for mercy and received only silence. Then, finally, the Kalori spoke. They would accept Earth into their dominion peacefully, but they wanted something in return. They wanted a marriage. Empress Velith, ruler of the Kalori Dominion, had recently lost her 4th husband in a border war. Kalori tradition demanded she take another. The idea of marrying a human amused her. It would show the galaxy how thoroughly humanity had submitted. A human prince consort would be the ultimate symbol of Earth's defeat. The Council searched for volunteers. They found none among the politicians or the wealthy who would agree to spend their life among aliens who viewed humans as little more than intelligent animals. Who would sacrifice everything for a planet that might not even remember their name? Park Do-hyun raised his hand. He was not a prince or a politician. He was a retired colonel, 52 years old, with gray streaks in his black hair and old scars on his hands. He had spent 30 years studying enemies, learning their weaknesses, and finding ways to defeat them. The Council looked at him with confusion. He was ordinary. He was unremarkable. He was perfect. The Kalori accepted him without much interest. They sent a ship to collect their new prince consort. Do-hyun said goodbye to his younger sister, Kim Yuna, at the spaceport. She was a brilliant scientist, a xenobiologist who had spent years studying the little information humanity had gathered about alien species. She held his hands tightly and told him to be careful. He smiled and told her not to worry. They both knew he was lying. The journey to the Kalori throne world took 3 weeks. Do-hyun spent every moment observing. He watched how the Kalori crew interacted with each other. He noticed their body language, their habits, their routines. They barely looked at him. To them, he was cargo. This was useful information. The throne world was called Verith Prime. It was a massive planet with purple skies and cities made of crystal and metal. Billions of Kalori lived there, along with servants from dozens of conquered species. Do-hyun saw creatures with scales, creatures with fur, creatures with too many eyes. All of them served the Dominion. All of them had once been free. The palace of Empress Velith stood at the center of the capital city. It rose into the clouds like a mountain made of glass. Do-hyun was brought through its gates in chains. Not real chains, but the symbolic kind. His wrists were bound with golden threads to show that he belonged to the Empress now. The Kalori guards clicked their mandibles in amusement as they led him inside. The throne room was vast. Do-hyun had seen cathedrals smaller than this. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, and the walls were lined with statues of previous Kalori rulers. Each statue was at least 20 feet tall. They looked down at Do-hyun with cold stone eyes, judging him, dismissing him. And there, at the far end of the room, sat Empress Velith. She was terrifying. 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and a body covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with her mood. Her face was vaguely humanoid but wrong in every detail. Her eyes were compound, like an insect's, made of thousands of tiny lenses that reflected the light. Her mouth was surrounded by small mandibles that clicked and twitched as she breathed. She wore robes of silver and gold and a crown of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. Do-hyun walked toward her slowly. His heart was beating fast, but he did not let it show on his face. He had faced death before. He had faced enemies who wanted to kill him, but he had never faced anything like this. The Empress watched him approach. Her mandibles clicked in a pattern that Do-hyun would later learn meant amusement. She spoke in the Kilori language, and a translator device turned her words into Korean. "So this is what humanity sends me," she said. "A small, soft creature with no claws and no scales. You are even uglier than I expected." Do-hyun bowed deeply. He did not respond to the insult. He simply waited. "Do you understand what you are?" The Empress continued. "You are a symbol, a trophy. You will stand beside me at ceremonies and show the galaxy that humans know their place. You will breed with me if I command it, though I doubt your weak genetics could produce worthy offspring. You will live in my palace until you die, which will not be long by Kilori standards. Your species barely lasts a century." Do-hyun kept his head bowed. "I understand, Your Majesty." "Good." The Empress waved one of her 4 hands dismissively. "Take him to the servant quarters. He does not deserve better until he proves useful." The guards led Do-hyun away. He was given a small room in the lowest level of the palace, near the kitchens and the waste processing facilities. The room had a bed, a small window, and nothing else. It smelled of chemicals and old food. Do-hyun sat on the bed and looked out the window at the alien sky. He smiled. The Empress thought she had won. She thought she had acquired a pet, a decoration, a symbol of human weakness. She did not know that Do-hyun had memorized the layout of every corridor they had walked through. She did not know that he had counted the guards and noted their weapons. She did not know that he had already identified 3 potential escape routes and 2 structural weaknesses in the palace walls. She did not know that humans had spent their entire history surviving against impossible odds. They had survived ice ages and plagues. They had survived wars that killed millions. They had survived their own worst instincts and emerged stronger each time. Kilori thought humans were weak because they were soft and small and short-lived. They did not understand that these things had made humans adaptable, creative, and utterly ruthless when necessary. Do-hyun lay back on his bed and closed his eyes. He had work to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, but over months and years. He would learn everything about the Kilori. He would find their weaknesses. He would build networks and gather allies. And when the time came, he would show the Empress exactly what kind of creature she had married. The arrangement had been made. Earth had sent its champion, wrapped in the disguise of a sacrifice. And the Kilori, in all their arrogance, had welcomed him into their home without ever suspecting the truth. Park Do-hyun was not a trophy. He was a weapon, and weapons do not need to be large to be deadly. 6 months passed on Verith Prime. The purple skies became familiar to Park Do-hyun. The smell of the palace kitchens became normal. The sound of Kilori mandibles clicking in conversation became as ordinary as birdsong had once been back on Earth. He was adapting, just as humans had always adapted. The court had forgotten about him almost immediately. After the wedding ceremony, which lasted only 15 minutes and involved no touching or affection of any kind, the Empress returned to her duties, and Do-hyun returned to his small room. He was summoned occasionally for state functions, where he would stand silently behind the Empress's throne while alien diplomats stared at him with curiosity or disgust. Then he would be sent back to his quarters like a piece of furniture being returned to storage. This suited Do-hyun perfectly. He spent his days wandering the palace. No one stopped him. No one cared where the human pet went or what he did. He was invisible in the most useful way possible. He walked through gardens filled with plants that glowed in the dark. He explored libraries containing knowledge from 100 conquered worlds. He sat in courtyards and watched Kalori nobles gossip and scheme, and betray each other with casual cruelty. And he learned. The Kalori language was complex. It had spoken words, but it also had a second layer of communication through pheromones. Different scents meant different things. Fear, anger, submission, dominance, attraction, disgust. The Kalori assumed humans could not detect these chemical signals. They were wrong. Human noses were weaker than Kalori scent organs, but they were not useless. Do-hyun trained himself to recognize the subtle smells. It took months, but eventually he could read the emotional undertones of any conversation. This gave him an incredible advantage. The Kalori spoke freely around him, never suspecting that he understood not just their words, but their true feelings. He learned which nobles hated the Empress. He learned which generals were loyal and which ones were ambitious. He learned which servants could be bribed and which ones were true believers in the Dominion. He kept all of this information in his head. He wrote nothing down. Paper could be found. Data could be stolen. But memories were safe, locked away behind a friendly smile and downcast eyes. One evening, while exploring the research wing of the palace, Do-hyun found something unexpected. He was walking past a laboratory when he heard a voice speaking Korean. Not through a translator, but naturally, fluently, with the accent of someone from Seoul. He stopped and listened. The voice belonged to a young woman. She was arguing with a Kalori scientist about some kind of biological sample. Do-hyun waited until the Kalori left, then stepped into the laboratory. The woman turned and saw him. Her eyes went wide. It was Kim Yuna, his sister. She rushed toward him but stopped herself before making contact. They were being watched. There were always cameras, always guards, always eyes. Instead, she bowed formally and introduced herself as a research assistant from one of the Dominion subject worlds. Do-hyun understood immediately. Yuna had come to Vareth Prime under a false identity. She must have volunteered for a scientific exchange program, hiding her true identity as his sister and her true purpose as a spy. She was brilliant and brave and absolutely insane for taking such a risk. They could not speak openly. Instead, they developed a system of communication. Dead drops in empty corridors. Messages hidden in discarded food containers. Codes based on childhood memories that no one else could understand. It was old spycraft, techniques that humans had used for centuries. The Kalori had never encountered anything like it. They did not even know to look for it. Through Yuna, Do-hyun learned what was happening in the wider Dominion. Earth was being slowly integrated into Kalori society. Human workers were being shipped to mining colonies. Human scientists were being recruited for research programs. Human soldiers were being trained to serve in the Dominion's military. It was not slavery exactly, but it was not freedom either. Yuna also brought news of the palace that Do-hyun could not access himself. She worked in the research wing, which was connected to the military command structure. She heard things. Important things. The most important thing was a name. Lord Thrain. Thrain was the Empress's cousin. He was tall even by Kalori standards, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that never seemed to blink. He commanded a fleet in the outer colonies, far from the throne world. Officially, he was a loyal servant of the Dominion. Unofficially, he was gathering power. Yuna had intercepted communications between Thrain and several high-ranking nobles in the palace. The messages were encrypted, but she had broken the code. Thrain was planning a coup. He believed the Empress had grown weak and that the Dominion needed stronger leadership. He was building an army in secret, waiting for the right moment to strike. Do-hyun took this information and did nothing with it. This confused Yuna. Should they not warn the Empress? Should they not try to stop the coup? Do-hyun explained his reasoning carefully. The Empress viewed humans as pets. She would not believe a warning from her human husband. She would assume it was a trick or a misunderstanding. Warning her would only expose Do-hyun and Yuna as spies, and they would both be executed. Instead, Do-hyun would wait. He would watch. He would let the coup happen and then use the chaos to prove his value. A crisis was an opportunity. The Empress would not trust a human who spoke of danger. But she might trust a human who saved her life. So Do-hyun continued his invisible existence. He bowed to nobles who spat at his feet. He accepted insults from servants who ranked far below him in the official hierarchy. He played the role of the pathetic human perfectly, while inside his mind he was building something dangerous. He mapped every corridor of the palace. He identified every guard station and every blind spot in the security system. He made friends among the other subject species, the quiet ones who cleaned the floors and served the food and were ignored just as thoroughly as he was. Many of them hated the Killori. Many of them remembered when their worlds were free. They would be useful when the time came. He also found Han Ji-woo, a human engineer who had been captured during the initial invasion of Earth. Ji-woo was being held in the Dominion's shipyards, forced to work on alien vessels. He was brilliant with machines. Do-hyun sent him messages through trusted servants. He promised freedom in exchange for loyalty. Ji-woo agreed. The months continued to pass. The Empress sometimes summoned Do-hyun to her chambers, not for affection, but for conversation. She found him amusing in the way a child might find a talking animal amusing. She asked him questions about Earth, about human customs, about what it felt like to be so small and weak. Do-hyun answered honestly, but simply, never revealing his true intelligence. He let her believe she was educating a primitive creature. During these conversations, Do-hyun studied her in return. He learned her habits. He learned her fears. She was powerful but isolated. She trusted no one completely. Her previous husbands had all died under mysterious circumstances, and she suspected that enemies surrounded her. She was right about that, but she was looking in the wrong direction. She watched the noble houses and the military commanders. She did not watch her cousin in the outer colonies. One night, after a particularly long conversation, the Empress looked at Do-hyun with her 1,000-faceted eyes and said something unexpected. "You are more than you appear." Human. Do-hyun felt his heart stop for just a moment. Had she discovered his true nature? Had he made a mistake somewhere? But the Empress continued. "You listen well. Most creatures talk too much. You understand the value of silence. Perhaps you are not entirely worthless." Do-hyun bowed and thanked her for the compliment. Inside, he was relieved. She had noticed something, but she had not noticed enough. She thought his silence was simple obedience. She did not realize it was patience. She did not realize that every quiet moment was being used against her. The invisible husband continued his work, day after day, building a web that no one could see. And somewhere in the outer colonies, Lord Thrain's fleet grew larger, waiting for the moment to strike. The storm was coming. Do-hyun intended to be ready. The Festival of Ascension was the holiest day in the Killori calendar. It celebrated the moment 3,000 years ago, when the first Killori ships had left their homeworld and begun their conquest of the stars. Every citizen of the Dominion was required to participate. Prayers were offered to ancestors. Feasts were prepared. And in the palace of Empress Valith, the grandest ceremony of all was held. Do-hyun stood in his usual place, 3 steps behind the throne. He wore the ceremonial robes of a prince consort, silver and gold threads woven into patterns that meant nothing to him. Around him, thousands of nobles filled the great hall. They wore their finest clothes and their most expensive jewelry. They laughed and talked and competed with each other for the Empress's attention. None of them knew they were about to die. Do-yoon had felt the wrongness in the air all morning. The servants were nervous. The guards were exchanging glances that meant something. The pheromone signals were all wrong. Fear and excitement mixed together in a way that made no sense unless something terrible was about to happen. He looked at the Empress. She sat on her throne, magnificent and oblivious. She was accepting tribute from a delegation of conquered species, smiling her alien smile, enjoying her power. She had ignored every warning sign. She had dismissed every report of unusual activity in the outer colonies. She believed she was untouchable. The first explosion came at sunset. The ceiling of the great hall shattered. Glass and crystal rained down on the screaming nobles. Through the smoke and debris, Do-hyun saw shapes descending. Soldiers in black armor, carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They landed among the crowd and began firing. The Empress's guards tried to respond, but they were too slow. Half of them turned their weapons on their fellow guards. They had been bought by Lord Thrain. The loyal guards fell in seconds, shot in the back by their own brothers. The nobles ran in all directions, trampling each other in their panic. Do-hyun did not run. He moved toward the throne. More soldiers were entering the hall now, pouring through doors that should have been locked. The palace security system had been compromised. Someone on the inside had given the attackers access to everything. Do-hyun had suspected this for months. Now he had confirmation. He reached the Empress just as her personal guards were being overwhelmed. She was standing now, all forearms raised, ready to fight. She was a warrior herself, trained from birth in the art of combat. But even she could not defeat an army alone. "Come with me," Do-hyun said. The Empress looked at him with confusion and anger. "You? What can you do, human?" "I can save your life, but only if you follow me now." A laser blast struck the throne, melting it into slag. The Empress had no time to argue. She followed Do-hyun as he ran toward the back of the hall. They entered a service corridor that the nobles never used. It was narrow and dark, designed for servants carrying food and waste. Do-hyun had walked this corridor hundreds of times during his months of exploration. He knew every turn, every junction, every hidden passage. Behind them, he heard soldiers entering the corridor. They were following. Do-hyun led the Empress through a series of turns that made no logical sense. Left, right, down a ladder, through a maintenance hatch. The soldiers behind them grew confused. Their maps did not show these passages. Their training had not prepared them for this kind of pursuit, but they were still following. Guided by the sound of footsteps and the Empress's distinctive scent, Do-hyun stopped at a junction and pulled a small device from his robes. It was a simple thing, built from spare parts he had collected over months. He pressed a button and threw it down the corridor they had just left. The explosion was small but loud. It collapsed the ceiling of the corridor, blocking the path behind them. The soldiers would have to find another way around. That would take time. The Empress stared at Do-hyun. "Where did you get that?" "I made it." "How?" "Humans are good with tools." They continued moving. The palace was in chaos now. Alarms were blaring. Gunfire echoed through distant corridors. The lights flickered and died as the power systems were damaged. Emergency lighting came on, painting everything in red shadows. They emerged into a larger corridor near the palace kitchens. 3 of Thrain's soldiers were waiting there, guarding an intersection. They saw the Empress and raised their weapons. Do-hyun moved faster than they expected. He was old by human standards, but he had trained his body for decades. He knew techniques from a dozen martial arts, fighting styles developed over centuries of human warfare. The Kelori had never studied these techniques. They did not consider humans dangerous enough to worry about. This was their mistake. Do-hyun drew a knife from beneath his robes. It was made of ceramic, invisible to the palace's metal detectors. He had carved it himself from materials stolen from the kitchen. It was not elegant, but it was sharp. The first soldier died before he could fire. Do-hyun's knife found the gap in his armor, the soft place beneath the chin where scales did not grow. The second soldier fired wildly as Do-hyun ducked beneath the blast and drove his knife into the creature's throat. The third soldier tried to run, but Do-hyun was already behind him, one hand over his mouth, the knife sliding between his ribs. 7 seconds. 3 bodies. The Empress watched in silence. Her compound eyes reflected the red emergency lights. Her mandibles had stopped clicking. For the first time since Do-hyun had met her, she looked genuinely surprised. "What are you?" she asked. "I am your husband," Do-hyun said. "We should keep moving." They continued through the palace. More soldiers appeared, but Do-hyun knew the terrain better than they did. He led the Empress through passages they could not follow, around traps he had prepared months ago, past barriers he had secretly installed during his invisible wanderings. Finally, they reached a door hidden behind a decorative panel in a forgotten storage room. Do-hyun pressed his hand against a scanner he had installed himself. The door slid open, revealing stairs leading down into darkness. "What is this place?" the Empress asked. "A bunker, built during the Third Succession War, 200 years ago. Your own people forgot it existed. I found references to it in the old archives." They descended into the darkness. The stairs went down for a long time, deep beneath the palace foundations. At the bottom was a heavy door made of metal that no longer existed in modern Killori construction. Do-hyun opened it with a key he had made from fragments of ancient alloy. Inside was a room filled with old equipment. Some of it still worked. There were communication systems, sensors, life support machines. Do-hyun had spent months preparing this place, bringing supplies down piece by piece, hiding them from the palace's surveillance systems. The Empress looked around at the bunker. She looked at the supplies, the equipment, the evidence of months of careful preparation. Then she looked at Do-hyun. "You knew this would happen." It was not a question. "I suspected," Do-hyun said. "Your cousin has been planning this coup for over a year. The signs were there for anyone who looked. Why did you not warn me?" Do-hyun met her compound eyes without flinching. "Would you have believed me? A human? A pet? You would have laughed and ignored my words. Or you would have suspected me of being part of the conspiracy and had me executed." The Empress was silent for a long moment. Then she made a sound that Do-hyun had never heard before. It took him a moment to realize she was laughing. "You are right," she said. "I would not have believed you. I underestimated you completely." "Yes," Do-hyun agreed. "That was your mistake." Above them, the palace burned. Lord Thrain's soldiers searched every room, every corridor, every hidden space they could find. They did not find the Empress. They did not find her human husband. They declared victory too soon. In the bunker, beneath the foundations, Do-hyun activated the communication systems and began sending messages. The real battle was about to begin. The bunker became their command center. It was cramped and old, but it was safe. Lord Thrain's soldiers searched the palace above for 3 days, before declaring that the Empress had died in the initial attack. They were wrong, but they did not know it yet. Empress Velith sat in a chair made for creatures twice her size, watching as Do-hyun worked. He was communicating with allies she had not known existed. Servants who had seemed loyal to no one. Minor nobles who had been overlooked by Thrain's conspiracy. Officers in distant outposts who still believed in the legitimate government. And humans. So many humans. "How long have you been building this network?" she asked. "Since the first month," Do-hyun replied without looking up from his equipment. "I had time. No one watched me. No one cared what the human pet was doing. And the humans? The ones sending you information now? Some are servants in the palace. Some work in the shipyards. Some are scattered across the dominion, placed in positions where they can watch and listen. Your people brought us here as slaves and workers. You never thought to worry about what we might do with the access you gave us. The Empress's mandibles clicked in what Dohyun now recognized as grudging respect. You played a longer game than I knew. Humans are patient when we need to be. We have survived many things worse than the Kalori. Over the following days, Dohyun explained his plan. It was unlike anything the Kalori had ever encountered. Their military doctrine was built on overwhelming force. Massive fleets, superior firepower, rigid hierarchies where orders flowed down from commanders who sat safely behind the lines. This approach had conquered 17 star systems. It had never failed. Dohyun proposed something different. He called it guerrilla warfare. The Empress did not understand at first. Why would anyone attack supply lines instead of battlefields? Why would anyone assassinate officers in their sleep instead of fighting them honorably? Why would anyone use deception and sabotage instead of direct confrontation? Dohyun showed her records from human history. Centuries of conflicts where smaller forces had defeated larger ones. Wars fought in jungles and mountains and cities where the powerful had been humbled by the clever. He showed her how patience and creativity could overcome strength. He showed her that there was no such thing as an unbeatable enemy. This is dishonorable, the Empress said. Yes, Dohyun agreed. Humans have never cared much about honor when survival is at stake. We care about winning. The campaign began quietly. Thrain controlled the palace and the capital city, but his grip on the rest of the planet was weaker. His soldiers were spread thin, watching for threats that never came from the directions they expected. The first attack was on a supply convoy. 12 vehicles carrying food and ammunition to a garrison outside the city. They traveled along a road that had been used safely for centuries. Nothing ever happened on that road. That night, the road exploded. Dohyun had arranged for explosive charges to be planted weeks earlier, hidden by servants who were never searched because servants were invisible. The convoy was destroyed completely. No survivors. No evidence of who was responsible. Lord Thrain assumed it was an accident. Equipment malfunction. Poor maintenance. He did not send additional troops to investigate. The second attack was on a communication tower. It controlled broadcasts across the entire hemisphere. Its destruction meant that Thrain's propaganda could not reach millions of citizens. Without constant messaging telling them that the Empress was dead and that Thrain was the rightful ruler, doubt began to spread. The third attack was not physical at all. Kim Yuna, still hiding in the research wing, had been working on something special. She had synthesized a pheromone compound that interfered with Kalori emotional regulation. When released into the ventilation system of a barracks, it made the soldiers inside paranoid and aggressive. They began fighting each other. 27 soldiers died before anyone realized what was happening. Thrain blamed saboteurs from rival noble houses. He began arresting his own allies. Trust within his coalition started to crumble. Han Ji-woo, the engineer Dohyun had freed from the shipyards, proved equally valuable. He had spent months studying the Dominion's technology. He understood how their ships worked, how their weapons functioned, how their security systems operated. He found weaknesses that even the Kalori engineers did not know existed. The orbital defense grid that protected Varith Prime was considered impenetrable. Jiwoo discovered that it relied on a network of ground-based control stations. Destroy the right stations, and the entire grid would fail for critical minutes. Long enough for loyal ships to enter orbit. Long enough to change the course of the war. Dohyun coordinated all of this from his bunker. He never appeared in public. He never gave direct orders. Everything happened through intermediaries, through coded messages, through networks that could not be traced back to their source. The resistance seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lord Thrain grew frustrated. His spies could not find the source of the attacks. His soldiers could not catch the saboteurs. His advisors offered contradictory suggestions, each one accusing the others of incompetence or treachery. The coup that had seemed so successful was falling apart. The Empress watched all of this with growing amazement. She had been raised to believe in the superiority of Kelari, warfare, direct, honorable, overwhelming. She had never imagined that war could be fought like this. In shadows and whispers, with patience as the primary weapon. Why do humans fight this way? She asked one evening. Do-yoon considered the question carefully before answering. Because we had no choice. On Earth, we were never the strongest creatures. We could not outrun predators. We could not overpower them with muscle. We had only our minds and our ability to work together. We learned that the strong can be defeated by the clever. We learned that the patient outlasts the powerful. We learned that any enemy, no matter how terrifying, has weaknesses that can be exploited. Your world sounds dangerous. It is. It is. Humans call Earth a paradise, but it is actually a death world. The weather changes constantly. Diseases evolve to kill us. Predators hunt us. Even our own bodies betray us as we age. We survive not because we are strong, but because we refuse to die. The Empress was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I thought your species was weak. I thought you were simple creatures who had stumbled into space by accident. I was wrong. Many have made that mistake, Do-yoon said. They usually do not survive long enough to learn from it. As the weeks passed, the resistance grew stronger. More cavalry officers defected to the Empress's side, convinced that Thrain could not maintain control. More subject species joined the fight, seeing a chance to weaken their conquerors. The humans spread throughout the Dominion became a network of eyes and ears, reporting everything they saw. Thrain's position grew desperate. He controlled the capital, but the capital was becoming a prison. His supply lines were broken. His soldiers were demoralized. His eyes were turning against him or disappearing entirely. Finally, the moment came. Jiwoo sent word that the orbital defense grid could be disabled. Yuna reported that Thrain had gathered his remaining loyal forces in the palace, preparing for a final stand. The pieces were in place. Do-yoon looked at the Empress. She had changed during their weeks in the bunker. The arrogance was still there, but it had been tempered by something new. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. She no longer looked at Do-hyun as a pet. She looked at him as something far more dangerous and far more valuable. It is time, Do-hyun said. Are you ready to take back your throne? The Empress rose to her full height, all 7 feet of scaled muscle and ancient power. Her compound eyes gleamed in the dim light of the bunker. I am ready, she said. Show me the human way of war one last time. The final battle began at midnight. Loyal ships dropped out of hyperspace above Vareth Prime. They had been waiting for weeks, hidden in the outer system, pretending to be merchant vessels and mining platforms. Now they revealed themselves, dozens of warships flying the banner of Empress Valith. Lord Thrain's orbital defenses tried to respond, but Han Ji-woo's sabotage had done its work. The control stations went dark one by one. The weapons platforms spun uselessly, unable to acquire targets. The defensive grid that should have protected the throne world had become nothing more than floating metal dot in the capital city. Chaos erupted. Resistance fighters emerged from hiding places across the city. They attacked military checkpoints, communication centers, and power stations. Explosions lit up the night sky. Gunfire echoed through streets that had been silent for months under Thrain's martial law. Do-hyun led the Empress through tunnels beneath the city. They had been dug generations ago during some forgotten civil war, maintained in secret by servants who passed the knowledge from parent to child. No one in power had remembered they existed. The resistance had been using them for weeks. They emerged in the palace itself, in a section that Thrain's soldiers had abandoned to defend more important positions. The sounds of battle were everywhere now. The distant boom of orbital bombardment, the sharp crack of energy weapons, the screams of soldiers dying in corridors they thought they controlled. The Empress moved like a predator, returning to her territory. Her forearms held weapons now, blades of traditional Kaelori design that had been hidden in the bunker for centuries. She was done hiding. She was done waiting. She was ready to kill. They encountered resistance almost immediately. A squad of Thrain's soldiers came around a corner and froze when they saw the Empress. They had been told she was dead. They had believed she was dead. The sight of her, alive and armed and furious, broke something in them. 3 dropped their weapons and ran. 2 raised their guns to fire. The Empress killed them both before they could pull the triggers. Do-hyun followed in her wake, his ceramic knife in hand. He dealt with the enemies she missed, the wounded soldiers who might still be dangerous, the officers trying to call for reinforcements. They moved through the palace like a blade through flesh, unstoppable and merciless. They found Lord Thrain in the throne room. He had gathered his most loyal soldiers around him, perhaps 200 in total. They stood in ranks before the melted remains of the throne, weapons ready, prepared to die for their master. Thrain himself stood at the center, wearing armor of black metal that made him look like a demon from old Kaelori legends. "Cousin," he said as the Empress entered. His voice carried across the vast hall, amplified by his helmet. "I should have known you would not die easily. You were always stubborn, and you were always ambitious," the Empress replied. "Tell me, Thrain, was it worth it? All these deaths? All this destruction? For what? A throne you cannot hold? I hold it now, and I will hold it after you are dead." He raised a hand, and his soldiers began to advance. What happened next was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Empress's loyal forces had been entering the palace through a dozen different routes, while Do-hyun and Velith kept Thrain's attention focused on the throne room. Now they attacked from every direction at once. Doors burst open. Ceiling panels collapsed to reveal soldiers dropping from above. The floor itself gave way in places where explosives had been planted. Thrain's soldiers found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, outmaneuvered. They had prepared for a frontal assault. They had not prepared for an enemy who attacked from everywhere at once, who used the palace's own architecture against them, who would spend months learning every secret passage and hidden room. Kim Yuna was among the attackers. She carried no weapon, but she threw containers of her pheromone compound into the enemy ranks. The effects were immediate. Soldiers turned on each other, screaming accusations of betrayal. Some clawed at their own faces. Driven mad by fear and paranoia, Han Jiwoo had rigged the palace's power systems to obey his commands. He turned off the lights in sections where Thrain's soldiers were strongest, plunging them into darkness while the resistance fighters, equipped with human-made night vision devices, continued their assault without pause. Within minutes, Thrain's army was broken. The survivors threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. Some received it. Others did not. Lord Thrain stood alone now, surrounded by the bodies of his followers. His armor was scorched. His scales were cracked. But he was still alive, still dangerous, still holding his blade. "Face me," the Empress said. "Let us end this the old way." Thrain laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "The old way? You bring humans and their tricks and their dishonorable tactics, and then you speak of the old way?" "I learned from them," the Empress said. "I learned that survival matters more than tradition. I learned that victory can come from unexpected places. But I am still Kaelori, and you challenged my throne. So yes, I will face you the old way. Unless you are afraid." Thrain's mandibles clicked in rage. He charged. The duel lasted less than a minute. Thrain was a skilled warrior, trained from birth in the Kalori combat arts. But the Empress had learned something new during her weeks with Do-Yun. She had learned to be unpredictable. She had learned to break the patterns that every Kalori warrior memorized. Thrain expected her to block his first strike. She dodged instead, letting his blade pass through empty air. He expected her to counter with a thrust. She kicked him in the leg, a move no honorable Kalori would ever use. He expected her to maintain proper distance. She closed to grappling range, where his longer reach meant nothing, and when he was off balance, confused, struggling to adapt to a fighting style he had never seen, she drove her blade through his chest. Thrain fell. His compound eyes stared up at the ceiling, at the hole in the dome where his ships had first entered. His mandibles moved, trying to form words. Nothing came out but a wet, clicking sound. Then he was still. The Empress stood over her cousin's body for a long moment. The throne room was silent, except for the distant sounds of fighting. The war was not over, not yet. But his outcome was no longer in doubt. She turned to look at Do-Yun. He stood among the carnage, his knife still in his hand, blood staining his ceremonial robes. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked like exactly what he was, a human who had survived against impossible odds. "You saved me," the Empress said. "You saved my throne. Why?" "Earth," Do-Yun replied simply. "The Alliance. If you fell, Thrain would have destroyed my people." His hatred of humans was well known. "I could not allow that. Is that all? Political calculation?" Do-Yun considered the question. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "No, not only that. I came to respect you during our time together. You are arrogant and cruel and blind to your own flaws. But you are also strong and honest and capable of learning. I did not want to see you die." The Empress made that strange laughing sound again. "You are a strange creature, Park Do-Yun. I am human. We are all strange." In the days that followed, order was restored. Thrain's supporters were captured or killed. The noble houses that had backed the coup were stripped of their power. The military was purged of traitors. The Dominion, shaken by the conflict, began to stabilize under the Empress's renewed rule. And then came the negotiations. The Empress summoned Do-Yun to her temporary throne room, a space cleared of rubble and bodies, but still marked by the scars of battle. She sat on a simple chair, not yet ready to replace the throne that Thrain's attack had destroyed. "I owe you a debt," she said. "Name your price." Do-Yun had thought about this moment for a long time. He had imagined wealth, power, status. He had imagined revenge against those who had mocked him. He had imagined many things. "Earth," he said. "Full autonomy. Protection under the Dominion's banner, but no interference in our internal affairs. We govern ourselves. We make our own choices. We are allies, not subjects." The Empress's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "That is a large request. I saved your life. I saved your throne. I showed you what humans can do when they are underestimated. I am asking for what my people deserve, and if I refuse..." Do-Yun met her compound eyes without fear. "Then I will return to Earth and begin preparing for the next war. Humans have survived everything this galaxy has thrown at us. We will survive the Kalori too, if we must. But I would prefer peace." The Empress was silent for a long time. Then she rose from her chair and walked toward Do-Yun. She stopped when they were face to face, the Kalori Queen and the human soldier, two creatures from different worlds who had learned to respect each other. "I will grant your request," she said. "Earth will be autonomous. Humans will be allies, not subjects. But I want something in return." "What?" "You. Not as a trophy, not as a symbol, as my partner, my advisor, my husband in truth, not just in ceremony. I have seen what humans can do. I want that knowledge at my side. Do-hyun thought about his grandmother's house in Daejeon. He thought about the stars he had watched as a child. He thought about everything he had sacrificed to reach this moment. I accept, he said. The treaty was signed 1 month later. Humanity entered the galactic stage not as conquered slaves, but as respected allies. The Kalori Dominion gained something they had never expected. Partners who could teach them new ways of thinking, new ways of fighting, new ways of surviving. Years later, when historians wrote about the great turning point in human-Kalori relations,